Meanwhile,
KMUZ, Turner Radio's Crackle, 100.7 FM and 88.5 FM in Marion and Polk County, Salem and Kaiser, both near and far. KMWV FM Dallas at 98.3 HD2 with monstrous sounds, and taking over the entire planet at KMUZ.org. For Spooktacular!
What's wrong, Austin? You look glum.
Well, you know, it's the holiday season and all, but something feels off.
How so?
I'm not sure. It's like that feeling of having not decorated by October 1st, but my decorations have been up since the end of August.
Which was really confusing at your end of summer mixer.
Maybe I forgot to put out the scarecrows and the corn maze?
Trust me, there are no more decorations to put out, even if you wanted to.
Perhaps I need to shuffle around the holiday music. It does seem like we're hearing Monster Mash a little more often than any of those Zachary tunes I put in.
It's Halloween music 24/7 up in here. I don't think that's the problem.
It just feels like we haven't had any truly gruesome encounters this year. A few ghost stories, sure, and some friendly guests popped by. But we haven't had one unspeakable horror arrive to unnerve us with ghastly wonder. Something that evokes an almost philosophical fear, where existential dread fills us until we can stand it no longer. It's just not fair. All the other horror hosts meet such excellent monsters, and here I am with a talking computer and some lab equipment.
I can sing and dance too, but I suspect that's not going to improve your mood now.
Just once I'd like to be faced with such an unthinkable creature of terror that I can finally understand what it is to stare down some cosmic horror right here on my show.
I just might know someone who could help us out tonight.
Hello, I'm Obadiah Baird.
Wait a minute. This isn't some cosmic horror, it's Obadiah. He's the friend of the show.
It's not the man who is scary. It's the secrets within that will freeze your very soul.
Hopefully those secrets are scarier than our theme music this year.
Mid-Valley Mutations.
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
I feel like that intro is a lot to live up
Tonight. Have you turned the lights off? Closed the windows? Good. Now, light a candle. Turn the radio up. And gather round. Keep your phone handy. That number again. 503-990-6101. When you are ready, call and tell us about any unexplained experience you have had. Because it's time to start telling stories.
Tonight we present Ghost Stories, Part 3. Something written this way comes.
And welcome to another exciting edition of Mid-Valley Mutations here on KMUZ. And this week we have a very special guest here in the studio. It's Obadiah.
Hello.
And this is kind of a return engagement in a way. We've had you on in the past, but we didn't talk about what you do otherwise. We just played records last time.
Yeah, it was mostly punk rock.
Yeah. So we're kind of shifting over to like a little bit of the other vibe that you have going on, and we'll get into that more and more as the show progresses. But we're also here to take some phone calls for anyone who has a ghostly encounter that they want to talk about or a supernatural experience. We have the lines open, and that number 503-990-6101. Please don't hesitate to kind of pop in and tell us about what you've been going through. We're here to help. Now, we have a lot of other things that we're going to try to get to throughout the show and whatnot, but I think we want to start with a little bit of music. So if you don't mind holding, we're going to put on a record, get to some tunes, set a little bit of a mood, and then we're going to ease into the next part of the program. And so I think we're going to turn over to another one of my favorite Halloween records. I think we played a little bit of this one last week, but we're going to get to this one here. And, yeah, we did. We heard a little bit from the Headless Horseman last time. So, let's find out what it's like to be buried alive.
A Headless Horseman has a lot to say, if I'm not,
Yeah, for someone
having a head.
Exactly. Let's get this one going here, and yeah, you're listening to Mid-Valley Mutations. Enjoy.
To die is a fate that must come to us all. But how horrible to be buried alive. Imagine the hell of lying trapped in your own coffin, your heart beating wildly, every gasping breath using up the valuable oxygen. This death by suffocation has befallen many a demented creature after attempts to claw himself out of his entombment.
And that track was called Buried Alive. From one of my new favorite Halloween records, Sounds of Terror, which contains the Monster Mash, which is not as cool as the rest of the record.
The Monster Mash doesn't send a chill up your spine?
Not nearly as much as it used to.
It doesn't make the hair on your neck stand up?
No, I love the back of this record, too, because what does it say? Horror, madness, terror. Mm-hmm. And it's a kid's Halloween record.
And the mash.
Right, the Monster Mash, yeah. Well, and this is kind of like that funny thing. We were chatting a little bit about this off air, like the way that horror is kind of introduced to people's lives as young people. So you edit this excellent zine, The Audient Void, which is a collection of, I guess, dark fantasy, horror, fiction, poetry, and artwork as well.
Yeah, weird fiction.
Yeah, I guess is the best appropriate way to put it.
I mean, it's all those things.
But I think that when you get into stuff like this, that it absolutely has that entry point of you're a kid, you're watching something, maybe you don't know that you're into horror, but the creepy things and other stuff start to catch your attention. And certainly for me, that was Halloween Records when I was a kid. You know,
Yeah.
like the little bit of the sound effects and the story. There was something in there that was like not like what you would normally hear on an average recording, and so that was like immediately like, huh, what's this? And it's this thing that's presented for kids, but it's supposed to be like, oh, let's terrify you.
Well, it's interesting because I was talking. It came up because I was talking about this post on a horror group that I'm on Facebook, where they asked like, what non-horror movie scared you as a kid?
Right.
And I kind of realized that, like, I don't know if anything's ever scared me as much as, like, the tunnel scene in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes.
Or the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And those are not ostensibly horrific or horror movies.
I mean, like, for the most part, both of those movies have very silly plots with very whimsical happenings. And then in the middle of them, we're just going to terrify you for a little while.
They just get weird. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, I mean, the appeal in general of horror stuff is this kind of like, there is a kind of almost like it's tickling a little bit of that same humor bone, but in this darkly funny way.
Well, I definitely feel like those were sort of the gateway drug to horror.
Right.
As well as, you know, like the Indiana Jones movies when the faces melt, or when the heart is plucked out of the chest. You know, Kali Ma.
Right. Those kind of moments where, like, it's clearly not the goal to be a horror thing.
Yeah.
But the creators are clearly aware that we're going to toy with some horror tropes here just to kind of kick it up a notch.
And at the age when I watched those movies, like, my parents at least would never have been like, oh, sure, go watch Nightmare on Elm Street. But those movies, you know, made the cut somehow.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, well, it was a way to sneak it in. Totally. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, so I guess in terms of origins and things like that, you know, last time we talked a lot about, like, music and punk rock and things that were inspiring us in that way. I mean, obviously, the horror thing kind of runs parallel. What made you think, okay, I have to make a zine now of some horror fiction poetry? Like you being a fan is one thing of like, oh, I'll read this stuff on the weekends, but like, this is a lot of work.
Well, there's actually a lot of crossover there.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I would publish The Audience Void without having come out of the punk scene.
Right.
Because the thing that the punk scene teaches you is that anyone can do it. You can pick up a guitar and you can learn 3 chords and you can write a song.
Right.
You can cut and paste a bunch of stuff, take it to Kinko's, and publish a zine.
Right.
So there was never really any like barrier in my mind to the idea that like I could create something. Which I think for a lot of people who don't come out of that sort of background, there's a lot more of this idea that like you have to know what you're doing. It has to be polished. You have to like have some like background in writing or editing or like none of which I had at all.
Well, and I certainly remember seeing zines before going like, well, how do they make this? You know, before I'd ever tried to make one, you know, just going like, wow, people I know wrote this? You know?
Right.
So there does feel like there's a little bit of a barrier that like, absolutely what you're saying, punk rock kind of says like, no, that barrier's not real. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, and so for me, like, when I started going to the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, which is not just a film festival. There's a lot of movies, but there's also a lot of writers there, and they do panels where they talk about, you know, weird fiction and Lovecraftian stuff, and
just kind of discussing the world, because
and so for me, going to that and seeing people doing all this stuff, the obvious takeaway from it for me, having come out of the punk scene, was like, I should contribute, I should try and create something, I should try and like actively be part of this scene instead of passively being part of it.
Right, yeah. Well, and there's something in that too where like, there's something inspirational about seeing a bunch of people who are passionate about something you like doing things, and you're like, well, I should be doing something too.
Exactly. Like, it's always felt to me like if you care about something, you should contribute to it.
Right.
As opposed to just kind kind of like sitting back and consuming.
Yeah. Well, certainly there is that level of fandom where, yeah, a lot of people are content to just sit back and enjoy stuff. But like, when you are activated in that way, like, yeah, you have to take it to the next level.
Which is fine, and I'm not at all like trying to be judgy about anybody who's just like content enjoying something. And,
Right.
Like, I mean, that's great. Like, we all need people who appreciate our work.
For sure.
And that is like a completely valid. It's just for me personally, I've always felt like I should get active. I should like create something.
Yeah. Well, and this makes sense too because it's right in the pocket for stuff that you enjoy. So, like, of course, this is going to be the route you're going to go.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you're 8 issues in.
Yeah.
The 8th issue just came out. What was it, like a month ago? Was it
Yeah.
less than that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, when you started this, like, did you even have a conception of, oh yeah, issue 8's going to be like this, and we have.
No, I still don't. I have no idea what the next issue will be like.
Perfect. I love hearing that.
In many ways, each issue is driven by the work that gets contributed.
Yeah.
I view the Audient Void as, I mean, like, it's a vehicle for other people's creations. I'm an editor of a magazine. I'm not a writer. I'm not
Right.
like, I'm not creating most of the content. I have an introduction that I write every issue, and that's it. Other than that, I'm basically like, I mean, I hate the word curating because I feel like it's been ruined by a lot of hipsters, but but that's
people that are curating these coffee shop art shows. Come on.
yeah, like, that's terrible. But that is, I mean, it is sort of what I do. And I mean, for the last issue, we got about 250 submissions, and we published 3 short stories and about 6 or 7 poems.
Yeah, I mean, like, you guys have a very long publication. It's not short by any stretch of the imagination,
No.
but, like, yeah, a few stories and poems do fill up space pretty quick. Like, this issue is, like, 53 pages, but, I mean, still a couple of short stories chew up a lot of real estate.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's 3 short stories out of hundreds that were submitted.
Right.
So my job, basically, as I view it, is, to select what I think is the best work.
Right.
Which, is very subjective, and I don't claim to be, correct. There's no way to be correct.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because again, a subjective thing. If
Exactly.
If somebody else was like, "Hey, what about this horror story?" Like, make your own horror zine.
Right.
There's always room for more in this world. In terms of like the numbers, though, I mean, this is just kind of taking off crazy because you made a comment, I think today, about how you had submissions for the next issue, and you've already received like a ridiculous number.
Submissions for issue 9 have been open for 3 days, and I've received over 50.
So there's clearly like a network here of people talking about this and whatnot, and they know about how to where cool stuff is. Now in terms of like the authors and whatnot, you have some people that repeat from issue to issue, but I mean that's mostly the quality of the text. It has nothing to do with like favoritism. But how did you meet some of these people? Was it all through the open submission policy, or?
I mean, there are definitely people who I have published who I consider friends and that I have relationships with. But, I mean, I'm also not afraid to reject them and publish other work if, if I think that other stuff is the best.
It's got to be about the quality.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's always what it comes down to for me. But a lot of the people who I am friends with, I have met at the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, which happens every year. And at this point, again, there are so many phrases that I kind of hate, but it is sort of like a gathering of the tribe.
Sure.
I feel like that has like a very Burning Man kind of.
But there is, you're getting at something though, like. So I used to work in a bookstore, and there's people who come in and buy horror, and then there's Lovecraft fans and weird fiction
Oh, yeah.
fans, and they are a different breed, and they are, like, you're not going to lump them in with like the kind of typical like, oh hey, here's a Dean Koontz novel, and then oh you might also like Lovecraft. No.
Well, and then there's another step beyond that, which is like a lot of the people who I hang out with are weird poets.
Right.
And, I was thinking about, like you went to that Noise Fest in Sacramento. Mm-hmm. And, like, I feel like Noise is this very small scene, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a smaller community than the average music scene.
I don't think you could ever do a 3-day festival of weird poetry. Like, it's, if anything, like an even
Right?
smaller...
That's true. Yeah.
Like, even more, like... I don't want to say insular, but like it's definitely like it's a small group of people,
Right.
And
but I mean, like to be fair though, I mean, like poetry is something that is like often maligned in the modern literature. Like it's not something that you see on bestseller lists. Like I don't see a lot of TV and radio like having poets on to talk about their new work. You know, so even within poetry circles, I have to imagine weird poetry is even further down the road.
Well, and a lot of it is working in a self-consciously outdated mode. They're
Yes.
writing a lot of rhyming, metered poetry, looking
Right.
back to the Romantic poets.
There's a gentleman that publishes in a few of them who does almost ballad style.
Not almost like he
it's
does.
like-
He does ballads.
Yeah.
Adam Boulevard. He's a good friend of mine. And,
Yeah, and then it's this very clearly and consciously older style of
ballads are some of the oldest
yeah.
forms of poetry, and was really the structure of kind of like oral, oral poetry.
Sure.
Going back to the very beginning. Yeah.
Well, and it's like the continuation of that Homeric style of narrative, but kind of a more rhyming version of it.
Right.
But I do like this idea here because, like, what you're kind of getting at is that there was this scene that existed. There were these people who are writing. There was these people who are looking to find a community, and the Audience Void kind of helps bind them together in a way. It gives them a place where some of this stuff can get out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, among other venues.
Right.
I don't want to take more credit than is deserved.
This is true. You're not the only Lovecraft zine that's being published in the world. But to be fair as well, that like in doing so, it also inspires other people because I'm sure that for example, a lot of zines that I see and run into are personal zines, tell stories, music reviews, or just here's what my day was like. It actually did have like a little moment, like it had this effect of like, oh yeah, you could do a fiction zine. Like it was one of those moments of like, oh yeah, this is a possibility, and it's something that I like about that, where you're taking the format and kind of doing something a little different with it.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because what you're talking about as far as like the personal zine, that's like a very much out of kind of the punk scene, and there is a tradition in science fiction and weird fiction going back a long time,
Even to the Worldcon days, like in the 30s and
of
stuff.
of the sort of publications that I do, and like my approach was very like inspired by Necronomicon Press, who are still around and published a lot. Back in the 70s and 80s was kind of their heyday, but they still exist.
Right,
And,
yeah. Just maybe the name is not as well known.
Zines like Nyctalops back in the 70s that published a lot of like weird fiction.
Right. Yeah, and there's a very much like a not just thematic or stylistic consistency, but like you have art that kind of like unites all of these too, like the kind of like the interior design, the covers and layout, not just the specific drawings and whatnot, have a style and whatnot that does evoke this kind of older publication. Yeah, I mean, it might look side by side with like Comic Bus, but it's a very different beast.
Well, and all the art and graphic design is all down to my friend Dan Sauer. Like
Yes.
I have zero skill at layout, and he makes it look amazing.
It is something where that jumped out at me the first time I picked one of these up, where a lot of zines, and I like this style, but they look like one person overnight knocked them up when they were like, okay, it's got to be done. You know, you just
Right.
quickly put it together, and it's. I mean, this looks like he actually, agonizes over different choices.
I mean, it's to the point where I go back and forth on whether or not I should call it a zine or a magazine, because it falls into kind of a middle ground. Dan Sauer, who does all the art and the graphic design, is a professional graphic designer.
Right. Yes.
So
it's not like you're getting somebody who's like still in college going like, "Hey, I'll do it for free, sir."
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, this is what he does for a living. And he's doing a lot of book covers for Hippocampus Press, who are, like, one of the better known kind of small presses in our field. And, he's been doing a lot of professional work kind of along the same lines.
Right. So. Yeah. Well, I've always been impressed with the presentation and just kind of the general design of these things, and the choices too. Like some zines, especially when they take submissions from other people, have a feeling of kind of like, well, they took everything that was sent in.
Yeah.
And again, not to lean on like some hipster nonsense, but this does feel like everything was carefully chosen, carefully selected, like to fit the style and the theme. Like it doesn't feel in any way like, oh, let's put something in because we need the space filler.
Yeah, from the very beginning, I always wanted it to be the best possible work that it could be. And, that's completely based on my opinion as editor. And
Right.
I'm not so full of myself that I think I'm right. It's just, at some point, all your decisions are based on
Right.
your own filter. So
Yeah. Well, and there is something to be said too for like, you could read a lot of stories that you even enjoy, but they might not be right for the Audient Void. Like you're trying to create something here.
Well, that's the thing. When you have 200 some submissions and you're publishing 3 short stories,
Right.
a certain amount of the decision making comes down to how do they fit together? How does the work interact with the other work that you're publishing? How do they weave together thematically? How do they fit as far as style goes? Because I usually come down to 20 or so stories, all of which are of a publishable quality, and
Right.
and then it just comes down to those sorts of decisions, those sorts of stylistic.
Yeah.
And
And if you tried to publish everything that got sent in, you would never be able to take new material. So, yeah. This kind of led to, in terms of your selectiveness and style and whatnot, to an actual chapbook being put together. I believe it was one of David Barker's, if I'm not mistaken. Now that's a pretty different direction, because with a zine, you're kind of leaning on the collective nature of all of the artists. Like everybody kind of adds to the stew and makes this thing. When you're doing like kind of a solo work where it's kind of one person's text, that's kind of a departure from the zine format. Was that a little nerve-wracking to do that, or?
I really like David Barker's work, and at some point as a publisher and an editor, you just have to say, I'm impressed by this. I think it's good enough, and just trust that.
Sure.
And I mean, in David Barker's case, it wasn't a huge leap. He's published short story collections and collaborations, and I mean, he's not an unknown writer. And in fact, in some ways, I'm really lucky because I live in the same town as him, and,
Right.
And his wife works in my bookstore. The whole thing about the Audient Void actually is it's very community driven. It's in some ways very Salem, Oregon centric, because Dan Sauer lives here. I know him personally. David Barker lives here. His wife works for me.
These are printed here in town.
They're printed by a local print shop.
Yeah.
I run a local business. I want to support local business as much as possible.
Yeah. And that comes through too, because it feels like, I mean, obviously, like we were talking about the professional design and whatnot, but there's also this other kind of clubhouse quality when you go to the Audient Void events, where you feel like, oh, hey, the gang's all here, and
for sure. Yeah, I mean, you get me and like Adam Bolivar and K.A. Opperman and Ashley Diosa all together. I mean, like, we have like the release events at the Book Bin, and it's fun.
Yeah.
And we have like an after party at my house, and we all hang out together and drink and like
inevitably talk about books.
talk about books. And, it's like, yeah, it is. Yeah, there's definitely kind of like a circle of people who are all friends and all get along. And,
Yeah.
it's a good feeling.
Well, let's transition to something else here in a bit, but I want to close with one more thing, because there's actually an event tomorrow that's related to kind of the Audien Void and whatnot. Now, if you've been to any of these releases for the zine, there's usually like some readings and people hang out and whatnot, but at least one of them I've been to, and perhaps several of them, have had a puppet show. And this is unlike anything I've seen before.
Yeah, Adam Bolivar writes and performs marionette shows that are, I would call them folk horror.
Yes, that's the closest thing I think you could say.
And they're pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, the marionettes themselves are beautiful objects that are just like creepy and wonderful.
His old scratch marionette with like the bird's skull head, and
it's so good.
The devil's always tempting someone into making some kind of bad decision,
right?
As he does.
The devil's good at that.
Yeah.
But so if you've never seen one of these marionette shows that we're talking about, like it's beautiful, it's fun, it's creepy. Like I really recommend this. And there's a one tomorrow at
tomorrow night at the Lovecraft Bar in Portland.
Right.
We're going to be doing a marionette show. Nathan Carson's going to be reading, and he's always phenomenal.
Yeah, and we're going to have a story from him actually in the next hour.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it. And John Shirley.
Yes.
I mean, he's a phenomenal writer. He's going to be reading, and then his band, the Screaming Geezers, will be performing, which...
Yeah, kind of a rare treat, so...
For a fan of old school Portland punk rock, like...
Yeah.
It's pretty great.
Well, and John is a great character because he is the intersection of, like, weird fiction and punk rock. Like, he's a great... Yeah. It is kind of funny how those things do, at least in the modern era, seem to run parallel, where there's, like, a lot of people in the weird fiction scene seem to love punk rock and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think metal maybe a little bit more so, but definitely both those scenes have a lot of that.
My favorite Patti Smith story was seeing her, and she spent a lot of the show complaining that she wasn't at the Lovecraft Film Festival that day.
Oh my gosh, it just occurred to me that we should play some Rudimentary Peni.
Oh,
Their
we
album
should.
Cacophony is like one of the best Lovecraftian records ever.
Yes, we should. Well, let's transition to a little music here, and then see if we can move to the next part of the show. If you have a ghost story, we are actually taking calls where people can come in and tell us about their experiences. So the number to call, 503-990-6101. Tell us about your experience. Tell us what has happened to you. What made you feel like you want to tell us about this experience. We're open, we're excited, and, well, it's that time of year. Yes, just in case you were wondering, let's tell you what you're listening to.
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
Mutations.
And we'll be right back.
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
Mutations.
The Pumpkin Tide. I saw thousands of pumpkins last night come floating in on the tide, bumping up against the rocks and rolling up on the beaches. It must be Halloween in the sea. And I think, now that we're kind of getting into the ocean and whatnot, we should probably talk to the weather computer. So, weather computer, what have you got for us this week?
Thank you, Austin. This is the Mid-Valley Mutations weather computer, and here is a look at the local weather, brought to you by Cosmic Horror. Unknowable, unthinkable, more terrifying than you can possibly imagine. Now available from your local government. Have you tried Cosmic Horror today? Ask for it by name! Tonight. Cloudy with periods of rain early, then cloudy with thunderstorms developing late. Low near 49 degrees. This is some serious cathonic weather, if you ask me. Winds south by southwest at 10 to 20 miles per hour. That wind is no joke. Please stay safe. 100% chance of rain, which should be all the warning you need to stay indoors, if you can. Sunrise at 7:31 a.m., if you can say it will even rise under these conditions. Tomorrow, thunderstorms in the morning. You better believe it. Then just rainy in the afternoon. High around 57 degrees. So, yes, not warm. Winds west at 10 to 20 miles per hour, with an 80% chance of rain. You probably want to stay indoors tomorrow, too, if you can. Sunset at 6:20 p.m. And that was a look at the local weather, brought to you by the weather computer and Cosmic Horror. At one time it was only available to a select few, but with the way things are going these days, soon Cosmic Horror will be available in an app on the phone you are staring at right now. Why not order some directly and skip the middleman? Cosmic Horror. Because everything else is almost as scary anyway. Now, let's get back to Austin and Mid-Valley Mutations.
Thank you, Weather Computer, for helping keep us on track. We are here doing Mid-Valley Mutations with our Halloween program, and we're taking calls, actually. If you have a ghost story or an encounter of some kind that you'd like to share with us, please give us a call, 503-990-6101, and we will put you on the air and let us, and you can wow us with your tale. Now, while we're kind of setting up for the next thing here, I think I'm going to turn things over to Obadiah, who not only did you come prepared to talk about your excellent zine, but you have some Halloween-appropriate literature to read to us as well.
Brought some poetry.
Excellent.
Well, so I feel like poetry is underserved.
Yeah. Well, and like I tried to set the mood with my Brodigan poem, but this might be a little more.
I like that actually. I liked it.
Yeah. He's got a couple. We might bring back the Brodigan a little later. But yeah, let's turn the screaming down a tad bit, and let's turn things over to Obadiah here with a little poem.
So this is by my favorite writer of weird fiction and weird poetry, Clark Ashton Smith. It is called The Kingdom of Shadows. A crownless king who reigns alone, I live within this ashen land, where winds rebuild from wandering sand, my columns and my crumbled throne. My sway is on the men that were, and wan sweet women, dear and dead. Beside a marble queen my bed is made within the sepulchre. In gardens desolate to the sun, faring alone I sigh to find. The dusty closes, dim and blind, where winter and the spring are one. My shadowy visage gray with grief, in sunken waters walled with sand, I see where all mine ancient land lies yellow like an autumn leaf. My silver lutes of subtle string are rust but on the grievous breeze. I hear what sobbing memories and muted sorrows murmuring. Across the broken monuments, my memorial of the dreams of old, the sunset flings a ghostly gold to mock mine ancient affluence. About the tombs of stone and brass, the silver lights of evening flee, and slowly now and solemnly, I see the pomp of shadows pass. Often beneath some fervid moon, with splendid spells I vainly strive, dead love's imperial to revive, and speak a heart-remembered rune. But ah, the lovely phantoms fail, the faces fade to mist and light, the vermeil lips of my delight are dim, the eyes are ashen pale. A crownless king who reigns alone, I live within this ashen land, where winds rebuild from wandering sand, my columns and my crumbled throne.
Who could blame it for not wanting to stay? It wasn't made to feel very welcome. We laughed at its flying saucers. Who needed them? But it, and all the other its, tried so hard to get with us, to be liked for itself alone. It came from outer space with love in its heart. It was so sad.
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
Mutations.
Okay. Had to get few things in order here. This is Mid-Valley Mutations. I'm Austin Rich, and we're here with Obadiah, the publisher of Audient Void and curator of punk rock playlists. to use our least favorite phrase.
Curated. It's curated.
And, obviously, someone else who's also interested in horror fiction and other things that are seasonally appropriate.
And horror movies.
That's true. And,
horror movie.
in fact, before we dive into this next little bit, I was going to continue my Halloween ocean theme here with another Brodigan piece, but you actually were mentioning that you wanted to recommend to our listeners your favorite YouTube available horror films, which these are all ones that we actually need to sit down and watch because I'm not familiar with all of
And to be
these.
clear, I watched all of these on YouTube. I'm not 100% sure they're still available on there, but hopefully they are.
I feel like last time I checked that they were because we talked about this before, but this is a good rundown because I'm sure that a lot of you are saying like, oh, okay, I've seen The Great Pumpkin and this, that, and all these things. So, like,
if you want to change it up this holiday season,
if you've seen, like The Thing like 5,000 times, and you're like, I need something else. Like, The Thing's great, but
it is a great movie.
Here's some other options.
So, firstly, Horror Express is a favorite of mine, starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee.
Right.
They're bringing this thing that they dug up back on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And, as happens, it starts killing people.
As the monster tends to do, yes.
But the greatest part is then they stop to get help, which is provided by Telly Savalas as a Cossack. Clearly not having been paid enough to try to do a Russian accent. So he's just kind of like, hey, I'm a Cossack. I'm here to help.
I'm Telly Savalas. Come on.
I love that movie. It's great. Yeah. It's a great film.
That's good.
You can watch it on YouTube.
A good recommendation.
I unabashedly love that film. I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Another great one is The Blood on Satan's Claw.
And this is the one you've described to me a few times.
It's so good.
I really want to see this one.
It's a classic of British folk horror.
Right.
From the early 70s.
Right, because if you're over The Wicker Man and you need something else.
Right. It's like you've watched The Wicker Man a few times, you're ready for the next step. The Blood on Satan's Claw. It's on YouTube. It's a great movie.
Yeah, that might be the next one I dig into because, I
highly recommend it.
I mean, the Wicker Man scratches this weird spot that so few other films do, and I understand why people wanted to remake it and whatnot, but the original is so pristine.
Well, the nice thing about The Wicker Man is if you like it, there's this whole genre of folk horror. There's more stuff waiting out there for you to kind of come along and discover.
And that's kind of the gateway in a way.
Yeah.
But Blood on Satan's Claw is one I don't know, and I think that's
I love that movie so much.
This weekend might be the time to dig in.
Yeah. And I've just always loved House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price.
Yes, we were talking about that earlier too, where there is a charm to that film that is kind of like.
I don't know that I've ever found it scary, even as a kid.
Right.
But there's just something about it that will always entertain me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In my mind, the way that he talks has the perfect horror movie dialogue in it. It's just there's something about every.
Yeah, Vincent Price is wonderful.
Oh yeah. And this is a good time to mention as well. Most of his old LPs and whatnot are also on YouTube.
Yeah.
Where he would be reading short fiction and other horror. There's a great one where he's reading witch spells and things like that.
Vincent Price did so much.
Yeah,
just so much.
Yeah, if you haven't already, this time of year, spend an afternoon Googling Vincent Price and just listening and watching. You'll thank yourself. Was another one? Was Haxan also on that list?
Haxan is probably my favorite. Actually, it's a silent movie.
Yeah.
That it purports and is kind of set up to be a documentary about witchcraft in the Middle Ages. But it has these amazing sort of recreations of scenarios involving witchcraft that are just they're so beautifully and artistically rendered. And it's just it's not just a great holiday movie. It's probably a top 5, maybe even top 3 movie for me, period. I just absolutely love that film.
And it was made in the silent era. It's not.
Yeah,
like
it's a silent movie.
There was something about the staging of films from that era where like they took so much time to like frame a shot and whatnot.
Yeah, and the use of light in it is phenomenal.
Cool. Well, yeah. If you were sitting around saying like, "Oh yeah, I might want to watch a movie later," there's stuff for free on YouTube. Don't even spend some money.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. You know, actually, last year, what I did around this time of year is I started just searching on YouTube old movies, and inevitably, about half of them end up being like black and white 40s and 50s cheap horror movies. And so, if you get tired of that list, just pick anything from that. You know, I mean, like The Bat or something like that.
Have you ever seen Matango?
No.
Or The Mushroom People, I think, was maybe the name of the American release. It's a Japanese movie.
Oh, nice.
That's pretty great.
I'll do one last shout out for YouTube. Another one of my favorite cheap, bad horror movies, The Creeping Terror, which like the monster looks like it's basically carpet remnants sewn together, and you're not quite sure where the face is.
Solid.
It's a good one. But yeah, that one's a freebie online somewhere.
Well, for just like full-on cheese, I kind of love Reptilicus also.
Yes. There's a good Mystery Science Theater
There
version
is a good
of that
Mystery
one.
Science Theater.
Yeah. But that one holds on its own as well.
Reptilicus is wonderfully awful.
Yeah. There's something about certain Mystery Science Theater movies where, like, if you could actually watch it without their commentary, like, you've stumbled onto something special. So there's a few that I can do that with, but not many. Well, let's dive into another little bit of reading here, and then we'll take another small break. We're on a little bit of a Richard Brodigan kick. And so this one is... Let's get this adjusted here. Trick-or-treating down to the sea in ships. As a child, I used to play at Halloween as if I were a sailor and go trick-or-treating down to the sea in ships. My sack of candy and things were at the wheel, and my Halloween mask was sails cutting through a beautiful autumn night, with lights on front porches shining like ports of call. Trick-or-treat was the captain of our ship, saying, "We are only going to be in this port for a short time. I want all of you to go ashore and have a good time. Just remember, we sail on the morning tide." My God, he was right. We sailed on the morning tide.
KMUZ Turner, 100.7 FM and 88.5 FM in Marion and Polk County, Salem and Kaiser. KMWV FM Dallas at 98.3 HD2, and taking over the entire planet at kmuz.org.
And welcome. Of course, it would not be Friday night if it wasn't for
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
Mutations.
And we hope that you're just kind of enjoying the format tonight. And wow, we're having a little bit of technical problems there. We hope you're enjoying these literary endeavors, as it were. We've been kind of reading some poems and talking about some fiction and some other things. And I think in that vein, we were talking about this earlier, we're going to have a little bit of a story here from, Nathan Carson and Aaron LaRue. We mentioned Nathan earlier, a writer, and does a lot of horror stuff, and also performs in Witch Mountain, among many other things. Erin's also a musician in her own right, and they cooked up a little Halloween treat for us this evening, and it's probably just a good idea to turn things over to them. So this is Mid-Valley Mutations. This is Nathan Carson and Aaron LaRue, and happy holidays.
Between the life of Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, as far as American horror goes, Ambrose Bierce is one of the most crucial figures. He was a satirist, journalist, and author who was famous for his Devil's Dictionary, as well as one of the most anthologized and widely read American short stories from the 19th century, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. In his 80s, in 1913, Ambrose Bierce decided to observe the Mexican Revolution firsthand and walked into Mexico and was never seen or heard from again. This is one of my all-time favorite short stories by Ambrose Bierce, or anyone, Oil of Dog. My name is Boffer Bings. I was born of honest parents in one of the humbler walks of life, my father being a manufacturer of dog oil, and my mother having a small studio in the shadow of the village church where she disposed of unwelcome babes. In my boyhood, I was trained to habits of industry. I not only assisted my father in procuring dogs for his vats, but was frequently employed by my mother to carry away the debris of her work in the studio. In performance of this duty, I sometimes had need of all my natural intelligence, for all the law officers of the vicinity were opposed to my mother's business. They were not elected on an opposition ticket, and the matter had never been made a political issue. It just happened so. My father's business of making dog oil was, naturally, less unpopular, though the owners of missing dogs sometimes regarded him with suspicion, which was reflected, to some extent, upon me. My father had, as silent partners, all the physicians of the town, who seldom wrote a prescription which did not contain what they were pleased to designate as Ol Can. It is really the most valuable medicine ever discovered, but most persons are unwilling to make personal sacrifices for the afflicted, and it was evident that many of the fattest dogs in town had been forbidden to play with me, a fact which pained my young sensibilities, and at one time came near driving me to become a pirate. Looking back upon those days, I cannot but regret at times that by indirectly bringing my beloved parents to their death, I was the author of misfortunes profoundly affecting my future. One evening, while passing my father's oil factory with the body of a foundling from my mother's studio, I saw a constable who seemed to be closely watching my movements. Young as I was, I had learned that a constable's actions, of whatever apparent character, are prompted by the most reprehensible motives, and I avoided him by dodging into the oilery by a side door which happened to stand ajar. I locked it at once and was alone with my dead. My father had retired for the night. The only light in the place came from the furnace, which glowed a deep, rich crimson under one of the vats, casting ruddy reflections on the walls. Within the cauldron, the oil still rolled in indolent ebullition, occasionally pushing to the surface a piece of dog. Seating myself to wait for the constable to go away, I held the naked body of the foundling in my lap and tenderly stroked its short silken hair. Ah, how beautiful it was! Even at that early age, I was passionately fond of children, and as I looked upon this cherub, I could almost find it in my heart to wish that the small red wound upon its breast, the work of my dear mother, had not been mortal. It had been my custom to throw the babes into the river, which nature had thoughtfully provided for the purpose, but that night I did not dare leave the oilery for fear of the constable. After all, I said to myself, it cannot greatly matter if I put it into this cauldron. My father will never know the bones from those of a puppy, and the few deaths which may result from administering another kind of oil from the incomparable Olcan are not important in a population which increases so rapidly. In short, I took the first step in crime and brought myself untold sorrow by casting the babe into the cauldron. The next day, somewhat to my surprise, my father, rubbing his hands with satisfaction, informed me and my mother that he had obtained the finest quality of oil that was ever seen, that the physicians to whom he had shown samples had so pronounced it. He added that he had no knowledge as to how the result was obtained. The dogs had been treated in all respects as usual, and were of an ordinary breed. I deemed it my duty to explain, which I did, though palsied would have been my tongue if I could have foreseen the consequences. Bewailing their previous ignorance of the advantages of combining their industries, my parents at once took measures to repair the error. My mother removed her studio to a wing of the factory building, and my duties in connection with the business ceased. I was no longer required to dispose of the bodies of the small superfluous, and there was no need of alluring dogs to their doom, for my father had discarded them altogether, although they still had an honorable place in the name of the oil. So, suddenly thrown into idleness, I might naturally have been expected to become vicious and dissolute, but I did not. The holy influence of my dear mother was ever about me to protect me from the temptations which beset youth, and my father was a deacon in a church. Alas, that through my fault these estimable persons should have come to so bad an end. Finding a double profit in her business, my mother now devoted herself to it with a new assiduity. She removed not only superfluous and unwelcome babes to order, but went out into the highways and byways, gathering in children of a larger growth, and even such adults as she could entice to the oilery. My father, too, enamored of the superior quality of oil produced, purveyed for his vats with diligence and zeal. The conversion of their neighbors into dog oil became, in short, the one passion of their lives, and absorbing and overwhelming greed took possession of their souls and served them in place of a hope in heaven, by which also they were inspired. So enterprising had they now become that a public meeting was held and resolutions passed severely censuring them. It was intimated by the chairman that any further raids upon the population would be met in a spirit of hostility. My poor parents left the meeting heartbroken, desperate, and I believe not altogether sane. Anyhow, I deemed it prudent not to enter the oilery with them that night, but slept outside in a stable. At about midnight, some mysterious impulse caused me to rise and peer through a window into the furnace room, where I knew my father now slept. The fires were burning as brightly as if the following day's harvest had been expected to be abundant. One of the large cauldrons was slowly walloping the mysterious appearance of self-restraint, as if it bided its time to put forth its full energy. My father was not in bed. He had risen in his nightclothes and was preparing a noose and a strong cord. From the looks which the unfriendly action of the citizens and my absence showed too well the purpose that he had in mind. Speechless and motionless with terror, I could do nothing in prevention or warning. Suddenly the door of my mother's apartment was opened, noiselessly, and the two confronted each other, both apparently surprised. The lady also was in her nightclothes, and she held in her right hand the tool of her trade, a long, narrow-bladed dagger. She, too, had been unable to deny herself the last profit which the unfriendly action of the citizens and my absence had left her. For one instant they looked into each other's blazing eyes, and then sprang together with indescribable fury. Round and round the room they struggled, the man cursing, the woman shrieking, both fighting like demons, she to strike him with the dagger, he to strangle her with his great bare hands. I know not how long I had the unhappiness to observe this disagreeable instance of domestic infelicity, but at last, after a more than usually vigorous struggle, the combatants suddenly moved apart. My father's breast and my mother's weapon showed evidence of contact. For another instant they glared at each other in the most unamiable way. Then my poor wounded father, feeling the hand of death upon him, leaped forward, unmindful of resistance, grasped my dear mother in his arms, dragged her to the side of the boiling cauldron, collected all his failing energies, and sprang in with her. In a moment both had disappeared, and were adding their oil to that of the committee of citizens who had called the day before with an invitation to the public meeting. Convinced that these unhappy events closed to me every avenue to an honorable career in that town, I removed to the famous city of Atumwe, where these memoirs are written with a heart full of remorse for a heedless act entailing so dismal a commercial disaster. The end. Happy Halloween, everyone. I was inspired by this story to write my own, Oil of Cat, which is coming in an anthology titled New Maps of Dream, edited by Cody Goodfellow and Joe Pulver on PS Publishing sometime in the future.
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
Mutations.
All right, that was False Figure with a song called Cursed. Little seasonally appropriate music, I think. And they actually played in Salem last night at the Graveyard. A good band that hopefully will be back soon.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's kind of... I love how, like, every once in a while, the kids rediscover something cool. So we've been kind of reading some fiction and some poetry, talking about literature. That piece by Nathan and Aaron was fantastic.
Yeah, can we talk about how great that story was?
Yeah.
I've read a decent amount of Ambrose Bierce.
Yeah, I didn't recognize that tale.
But I'm pretty sure I've never read that, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, and this is the other thing I think that's great about horror short fiction, is that, like, even when you're this far into it as a fan, you'll still find new little things here and there. Classics, even. So.
I personally believe that horror is at its best in the short fiction format.
Yeah. There's it's very hard to pull off a novel length. Well, because to some degree or another, they survive. So, anyway, thank you so much for that story. That was fantastic. In that same vein, we are going to have some more poetry and whatnot. Let's turn things back over to our editor-in-chief here in the studio. This is Obadiah Bayard reading actually a selection from The Audient Void.
Yeah, so I'm going to read a poem by K.A. Opperman, probably the world's most Halloween-obsessed poet. I feel pretty comfortable giving him that title. And this poem is called Hymn to the Great Pumpkin. O orange gourd, great emblem of our day, all-hallowed pumpkin, pride of Halloween, your shell alone is fit to house the sheen of candlelight that keeps the imps at bay. We've chosen you to hold the Samhain flame and guard against the ghosts that haunt this night. Yours is the weirdly dancing eldritch light, wherein is mystery without a name. You smile upon the autumn-littered lawn, when in the evening twilight parts the veil. With spectral hands you brave the night's travail, with glowing gladness lasting till the dawn. The trick-or-treaters seek you one by one, to learn a secret some will take to heart. You are the Hierophant, you play your part. Throughout our lives your work is never done. We worship you on porch in pumpkin patch, showing our devotion with our toil. How solemnly we till the summer soil, how lovingly we carve and light the match. You give yourself unto the carver's knife, year after year hanged king of harvest home. But though you rot into the autumn loam, you rise again in spring with green new life. But we grow old, and spring returns no more, and then we place you on an ancient porch. You are the bearer of tradition's torch, and you will teach our children ways of yore. O orange gourd, great emblem of our day, all-hallowed pumpkin, pride of Halloween, when autumn comes for me, I'll walk away, dim life and death with you to show the way.
I did not want that part.
To lovers, the moon is a thing of beauty. But to this man it is a deadly curse. When the moon is full, this miserable wretch turns into a hairy, snarling half-man, half-beast. He prowls the night, his fangs thirsty for human blood. He is a werewolf.
All right, that was a little bit of the werewolf.
I'm afraid we're now too mauled to carry on.
Yeah, we have been a little bit mauled. This is Mid-Valley Mutations, and we are telling ghost stories, so if you have something you want to share, please give us a call, 503-990-6101. And
I have no good ghost stories.
Yeah, well, this is part of the reason why I do this show, is that I haven't had an encounter. And so, like, I keep hoping that maybe I'm, like, tempting fate in some way by asking for ghost stories. But
Kat's family lives down in Yoncalla and has, I think it's the oldest house in Oregon that's still owned by the original family.
Oh, interesting.
And
that would be a good place.
Other people have had experiences in that house, but I've stayed in it probably a half dozen times and have had
nothing. Yeah,
nothing.
This is how it is for me too. It's like you go into and they're always like, "Oh, down in the basement, I feel something," and I walk down there thinking like, "Okay, it's gonna happen," and then like there's jars of pickles.
Well, I feel like there's always this kind of like, you're too much of a skeptic, and that's why.
That's exactly.
But my question is, maybe you're not enough of a skeptic, and that's why.
Ooh, zing! Oh, man, you got me on that one. Well, regardless, if you have had an encounter and you do want to give us a call, please, 503-990-6101. We got about 40 minutes left in the program. And I think, did you want to do another piece? Or?
Yeah, I'll read another Clark Ashton Smith poem.
Yes. Someone who is near and dear to both of our hearts.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, this is called The Eldritch Dark. Now as the twilight's doubtful interval closes with night's accomplished certainty, a wizard wind goes crying eerily, and on the wold misshapen shadows crawl, miming the trees whose voices climb and fall, imploring in sabbatic ecstasy, the sky where vapor-mounted phantoms flee from the scythed moon impendent over all. Twin veils of covering cloud and silence thrown across the movement and the sound of things make blank the night till in the broken west the moon's ensanguined blade awhile is shown. The night grows whole again, the shadows rest, gathered beneath a greater shadow's wing. I love the last line of that poem.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
The creature is back. He needs a doctor, a plastic surgeon. He's been touched to the quick, slowly. It's a sad tale the creature who walks among us sings. He is the last of the strolling troubadours, the very end. Listen as he sings, who is the fairest one of all?
Earl King. Who rides so late in a night so wild? A father is riding with his child. He clasps the boy close in his arm. He holds him tightly. He keeps him warm. My son, you are trembling. What do you fear? Look, father, the Earl King, he's coming near with his crown and his shroud. Yes, that is he. My son, it's only the mist you see.
Oh, lovely child, oh, come with me. Such games we'll play, so glad we'll be. Such flowers to pick, such sights to behold. My mother will make you clothes of gold.
Oh, father, my father, did you not hear the Earl King whispering in my ear? Lie still, my child, lie quietly. It's only the wind in the leaves of the tree.
Dear boy, if you will come away, my daughters will wait on you every day. They'll give you the prettiest presents to keep. They'll dance when you wake, and they'll sing you asleep.
My father, do you not see the Earl King's pale daughters waiting for me? My son, I see what you say. The willow is waving its branches of gray.
I love you, so come without fear or remorse, and if you're not willing, I'll take you by force.
My father, tighten your hold. The Earl King has caught me. His fingers are cold. The father shudders. He spurs on his steed. He carries the child with desperate speed. He reaches the courtyard and looks down with dread. There, in his arms, the boy lies dead.
November 9th.
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019
Mutations.
All right. This is KMUZ. We have we're doing our kind of a literary Halloween program, traipsing through some poetry and stories and other things that we quite enjoy. And we are the lines are open, although it's been a little bit quiet. So please, if you are sitting there thinking like, oh, I'd like to make a call,
quiet like the grave.
Yeah, it has been very eerie out there. But this is the last half hour, so if you want to get something in, this is the time to do it. Give us a ring. We'll put you on the air. Now, we just heard, was it The Earl King, a Goethe poem, translated by Louis Untermeyer.
Oh, man, one of my favorite translators.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Louis. Yeah, I love that this was on a Scholastic record from an elementary school that I bought at a thrift store. So, teaching those kids about that creepy poetry early. Mm-hmm. Speaking of, are we moving on to another poem, or what do you got for us?
Do you want me to read another poem?
Yeah. Let's.
Okay.
Or whatever is whatever fits the mood. How about that?
I think I'm going to go back to a Kyle Opperman Halloween poem.
Getting a lot of action on the program tonight.
He's written some of the best Halloween poetry out there, in my opinion. This is called. And, so you know my poet friends are nerds because there's much argument over how you pronounce. It's the either Sawanacht or Savanacht.
I have heard this argument, yes.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Sawanacht. The Sawanacht is coming. O child, beware the chilly air, October twilight's numbing. When leaves fall red and fields are dead, the Sawanacht is coming. With pumpkin grin and wrinkled skin, it wakes on Hallows Even, to roam the night by lantern light, a goblin few believe in. But well you should, for when the wood at dusk begins to darken, it takes a child down elf roads wild, where none to screams can hearken. O child, take heed of what you read in books to mold succumbing. Though known by few, old tales are true. The Sawanacht is coming.
Nice. I like that his like relentless dedication to this subject too. Like, it's one of those things where some people would think like, okay, I'm going to write one poem about the autumn, and then maybe I'll tackle other subjects. I like that this is like, no, I'm going to get at it until I've hit every angle.
His dedication, and the thing too is like, he is obsessed with Halloween, but he is also probably among the handful of like finest traditional poets of rhyming metered verse.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
In the world. Like, his craft is absolutely flawless.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I sort of love about this new group of weird poets is they're not afraid to have fun with it and to combine it with like pop culture, to combine it with Halloween, to, you know, write poems about, you know, Bathory bathing in the blood of virgins, you know, write poems about like pumpkins, you know, write poems about Hammer horror movies.
Right.
But in this like, with this absolutely sort of flawless approach to the actual craft of poetry at the same time.
Yeah, like just because you're doing maybe something that could be associated with lowbrow culture doesn't mean that you're approaching it with like a lowbrow slapdash attitude.
Yeah.
You know, like let's try to make this elevated as far as I can take it. Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah, I guess we should give a shout out the Crimson Circle.
The Crimson Circle, yeah.
Kind of
Ashley Diosis, K.A. Opperman, Adam Bolivar, and D.L. Myers.
Yeah. Now, were they in an organization before Audient Void, or did you kind of help usher them into?
I can take no credit for it. They
okay.
They sort of brought their own. It involved a ritual in a graveyard, as all great things do.
Of course.
You know,
right on. Well, you know, this is probably a good time to take a quick little break and chat with the weather computer. But maybe you got another one on the other side of this? Or?
Sure.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, this is Mid-Valley Mutations. And if you're sitting there thinking like, hey, I got something kind of spooky for you, give us a call, 503-990-6101. There's still a little bit of time left in the show. But first, let's check in with the weather computer. So, weather computer, what have you got for us this week?
Love me some weather computer.
Thank you, Austin. This is the Mid-Valley Mutations weather computer, and here is a look at the local weather, brought to you by the Audient Void, a journal of weird fiction and dark fantasy, locally published right here in Salem, Oregon. You can order back issues at theaudientvoid.bigcartel.com. The Audient Void. When was the last time you let the creeping terrors swallow your mind? Tonight. Cloudy with periods of rain early, then cloudy with thunderstorms developing late. Low near 49 degrees. You bring Obadiah into the studio, the weather adapts accordingly. Winds south by southwest at 10 to 20 miles per hour. Maybe bring in anything not nailed down. 100% chance of rain, which means it's almost guaranteed not to keep up at all. Sunrise at 7:31 a.m. Tomorrow. Thunderstorms in the morning. At least, I really want them to happen. Then just rainy in the afternoon. High around 57 degrees. You might want to go with a sweater. Winds west at 10 to 20 miles per hour, with an 80% chance of rain. Let's hope you didn't have any outdoor plans. Sunset at 6:20 p.m. And that was a look at the local weather, brought to you by the weather computer, and the Audient Void. Bringing the kind of Lovecraftian horror you know and love, by artists and writers that perfectly suit the holiday season. Now, enough of my sales pitch routine. Let's get back to Austin, and Mid-Valley Mutations.
Oh, thank you, Weather Computer. And in case he was speaking a little too quickly, you can get the Audient Void online if you want to order it. theaudientvoid.bigcartel.com.
Yep.
That's
our web store. You can also follow us on Facebook.
Right.
You can follow us on Twitter, but I hate Twitter, so it's mostly just whatever I post on Facebook.
Twitter has kind of become a little bit of a horror show in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I we should also mention, if you're curious, not all of the back issues are available. So it's like only the last 3, I believe.
Yeah, I print 150 copies of each issue, and when they sell out, it is sold out.
It's gone.
It's,
so.
Yeah. In an age where everything sort of exists eternally on the internet, I'm a fan of the analog.
Yes. Well, and this is kind of getting back to something I feel strongly too, where it's like, I think a lot of us spent a lot of time really enamored with these phones and the internet and what it could do, and we've kind of pulling our heads out of it in the last year or so, going like, what else is out there? And I like finding things that don't have a place online. I like finding things that you need to actually interact with in some way. So yeah, if you're sitting here going like, oh, I better step on it, like, yeah, order soon, because when they're out, they're out.
Well, and it's funny too, because I occasionally get people who are like, why don't you have a website? Why don't you better publicize? I'm like, every issue sells out, and I get like 250 submissions for each one.
So you're doing something right.
I don't know if I'm chasing more success than that.
Right, exactly. For sure. Well, let's move on to some more literature. What do you got here? Another a poem, or?
Yeah, I'm just kind of alternating between Clark Ashton Smith and Kyle Opperman.
Excellent. Well, yeah, let's do it, and then maybe we'll do a tune after this, and then
sure.
I'll close with my trio of Brodigan Halloween favorites.
Okay. This is called "The Melancholy Pool" by Clark Ashton Smith. Marked by that priesthood of the night's misrule, the shadow-cowled imprecatory trees, cypress that guarded woodland secrecies, and graves that waited for delaying ghoul. Nathless I neared the melancholy pool, chief care of all, but closelier sentineled by those whose roots were deepest in dead eld, where the thwart-woven boughs were wet and cool, as with a mist of poison I drew near, to mark the tired stars peer dimly down, through riven branches from the height of space, and shudder in those waters with quick fear, where in the black deeps the pale moon seemed to drown, a haggard girl with dead, despairing face.
She promised not to tell, but that's really what happened. And then, on top of that... So then she said about the backseat of that car with fireworks. And then she said, after he came over to her and I said, you can't mean that. You just can't mean it. Well, you should always check the gas before you start out. Oh, I know. And this is what I well, didn't you take the roads with children? Not to be believed. This is just not to be believed. She wouldn't let me oh, I don't think so. I was sworn to secrecy.
And this one is entitled Halloween in Denver. She didn't think that she would get any trick-or-treaters, so she didn't buy anything for them. That seems simple enough, doesn't it? Well, let's see what can happen with that. It might be interesting. We'll start off with me reacting to her diagnosis of the situation by saying, hell, get something for the kids. After all, you're living on Telegraph Hill, and there are a lot of kids in the neighborhood, and some of them are certain to stop here. I said it in such a way that she went down to the store and came back a few minutes later with a carton of gum. The gum was in little boxes called chiclets, and there were a lot of them in the carton. Satisfied? She said. She's an Aries. Yes, I said. I'm an Aquarius. We also had 2 pumpkins, both Scorpios. So I sat there at the kitchen table and carved a pumpkin. It was the first pumpkin that I had carved in many years. It was kind of fun. My pumpkin had 1 round eye and 1 triangular eye and a not very bright, witchy smile. She cooked a wonderful dinner of sweet red cabbage and sausages and had some apples baking in the oven. Then she carved her pumpkin while dinner was cooking, beautifully away. Her pumpkin looked very modernistic when she was through. It looked more like an appliance than a jack-o'-lantern. All the time that we were carving pumpkins, the doorbell did not ring once. It was completely empty of trick-or-treaters, but I did not panic, though there were an awful lot of chiclets waiting anxiously in a large bowl. We had dinner at 7:30, and it was so good. Then the meal was eaten, and there were still no trick-or-treaters. It was getting after 8, and things were starting to look bad. I was getting nervous. I began to think that it was every day except Halloween. She had, of course, looked beautifully down upon the scene with an aura of Buddhistic innocence, and carefully did not mention the fact that no trick-or-treaters had darkened the door. That did not make things any better. At 9 o'clock, we went in and lay down upon her bed, and we were talking about this and that, and I was in a kind of outrage because we had been forsaken by all trick-or-treaters. And I said something like, "Where are those little bastards?" I had moved the bowl of chiclets into the bedroom so I could get to the trick-or-treaters faster than the doorbell rang. The bowl sat there despondently on the table beside the bed. It was a very lonely night. At 9:30, we started having sex. About 54 seconds later, we heard a band of kids come running up the stairs, accompanied by a cyclone of Halloween shrieking and mad doorbell ringing. I looked down at her, and she looked up at me, and our eyes met in laughter. But it wasn't too loud, because suddenly, we weren't at home. We were in Denver, holding hands at a secret street corner, waiting for the light to change.
The tarantula was getting too big for his britches. He was big as a barn and strictly from hunger. He just ate too much. Whole cows, sheep for snacks. Something had to be done to curb his appetite. Music might do it. It can be so sickening. Tarantula music eats some people up alive.
I love that song so much.
Little rudimentary peni there.
Night Gaunt.
That's one of those things where it's kind of, it fills this weird, because he hits that kind of like horror reality vibe in a way that's like, and I mean, some punk rock tries to be scary, but I think that like I'm actually kind of nervous when I listen to him. You know, like, oh wow. So yeah, I should listen to that more. This has been a lot of fun. We've been hanging out, reading some stories. Didn't get any calls, but that does happen from time to time. We got a few more minutes, so if you're sitting there with a story that you really want to tell, we'll even go over a few minutes. 503-990-6101. But I think we got at least one more from Obadiah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you again so much for coming in and sharing the Audient Void. And
it's always my pleasure.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope that we made the case for people out there to please pick it up. It's a great collection, and this time of year, it's even more appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's. Is this another Smith poem or?
No, I'm actually going to read. This is a fragment that was found in Lovecraft's papers after his death, and a lot of those fragments they know are based on dreams that he had.
Whoa!
So this is called Azathoth. When age fell upon the world and wonder went out of the minds of men, when gray cities reared to smoky skies tall towers grim and ugly, in whose shadow none might dream of the sun or of spring's flowering meads. When learning stripped earth of her mantle of beauty, and poets sang no more save of twisted phantoms seen with bleared and inward-looking eyes, when these things had come to pass, and childish hopes had gone away forever, there was a man who traveled out of life, on a quest into the spaces whither the world's dreams had fled. Of the name and abode of this man but little is written, for they were of the waking world only, yet it is said that both were obscure. It is enough to know that he dwelt in a city of high walls where sterile twilight reigned, and that he toiled all day among shadow and turmoil, coming home at evening to a room whose one window opened not on the fields and groves, but on a dim court, where other windows stared in dull despair. From that casement, one might see only walls and windows, except sometimes when one leaned far out and peered aloft at the small stars that passed. And because mere walls and windows must soon drive to madness a man who dreams and reads much, the dweller in that room used night after night to lean out and peer aloft, to glimpse some fragment of things beyond the waking world and the grayness of tall cities. After years, he began to call the slow-sailing stars by name, and to follow them in fancy when they glided regretfully out of sight, till at length his vision opened to many secret vistas whose existence no common eye suspects. And one night a mighty gulf was bridged, and the dream-haunted skies swelled down to the lonely watcher's window to merge with the close air of his room and make him a part of their fabulous wonder. There came to that room wild streams of violet midnight glittering with dust of gold, vortices of dust and fire swirling out of the ultimate spaces and heavy with perfumes from beyond the worlds. Opiate oceans poured there, litten by suns that the eye may never behold, and having in their whirlpools strange dolphins and sea nymphs of unrememberable deeps. Noiseless infinity eddied around the dreamer and wafted him away without even touching the body that leaned stiffly from the lonely window. And for days not counted in men's calendars, the tides of far spheres bore him gently to join the dreams for which he longed, the dreams that men have lost. And in the course of many cycles, they tenderly left him sleeping on a green sunrise shore, a green shore fragrant with lotus blossoms and starred by red camelates.
Nice. Very cool. I need to do more stuff with reading on this show. It seems to kind of fit in certain times of the year, and that would be great. And on the subject of reading, in case you missed the subtext here, check out the book bin. You can find books there, and it helps Obadiah. So a little bit, anyway.
You're talking about reading. There is a tradition in England of reading ghost stories on Christmas Eve.
This is true, yeah. I mean, I always think of like this time of year as the corridor for like horror and ghost stories, because like pretty much through until like spring, it's really it feels appropriate. Yeah, we've done a little bit of ghost stuff on during the Christmas season, but not a lot. Check out the program online, midvalleymutations.com. Lots of back episodes, and we'll include some links that relate to this show. In fact, the last one that Obadiah was on. We'll put a link to that one. And next week we have Brian coming in, Fervent Torpor. Brian McGill, actually, who used to do radio way back in the 80s and 90s. And is going to recreate a little bit of his Halloween radio program that he used to do back then.
That sounds fun.
It's going to be cool. And then I think he's going to even do a Fervent Torpor live performance as well. And we'll be taking some calls then, too. So 503-990-6101. Let us know what you want to hear and when. Okay, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Anything else before we call it a night?
No, it's been a pleasure.
Excellent.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on down. This is Mid-Valley Mutations here on KMUZ. I should probably do a little bit of the legal ID before we go. It is, you're listening to KMUZ, community radio for the Mid-Willamette Valley. KMUZ Turner 100.7 and 88.5 FM. Also KTUP Dallas 98.3 HD2, and streaming worldwide, taking over the entire planet at KMUZ.org. Now, let's check in with the blob, shall we?
Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splash, a blush, be careful of the blob. Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splash, a blush, be careful of the blob. Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splash, a blush, be careful of the blob. Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splash, a blush, be careful of the blob. Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor.
Mid-Valley
Halloween Spooktacular 2019!
Mutations.